The end goal, the ultimate goal, is a mandatory code for autonomous ships, or MAS. That was based on conclusions drawn from a regulatory scoping exercise we conducted a couple of years back, and we finalized it last year.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast listeners, and welcome to episode 198 of the Shipping Podcast. When I started this podcast 7 years ago, I asked each and every guest, what do you think about autonomous ships? After a while, I got tired of putting that question to my guests as time moved on and autonomous vehicles became more and more mainstream. Now, 2022, I want to find out, where are we as an industry? Are we making any progress, or is the idea dead? Then I realized that there is a man in Sweden who is leading the Swedish government's efforts for smart ships and autonomous shipping. He's also chair of the Maritime Autonomous Surface Ships, MAS, working group at the International Maritime Organisation, which is an international regulatory initiative. His name is Henrik Tunfors, and he is the senior advisor at the Swedish Transport Agency, and as I said, chair of the IMO MAS working groups. I hope you will enjoy our conversation. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Henrik Tunfors. I'm a legal advisor by trade and sort of a senior advisor at the Swedish Transport Agency at the moment.
And what is your background?
Well, my background is legal, so I'm trained legally, and but I've been in the shipping community, you could say, for a very long time, at the government level or at the authority level, I would say. So I've been a legal advisor, and I've also been very much involved in international liaison for some time. And also I've had some management position, service certification and seaworthiness. And then I shifted a bit to more of a strategic advisor or management support for a while. And now these days, I've become more of a free agent, you could say. But I try to promote sound regulations for smart ships, for example. And before, I've been like a key account manager for registry issues. What we call the inflagnings, the lots, was one of my assignments priorly. But I think overall, I have a passion for rules and regulations, and that's a bit of a nerdy attitude perhaps, but I think my passion is for sound, relevant regulations, and that's where I try to help and assist both internally and externally.
So how did you pick up on the shipping, the maritime industry?
Well, that was a very good question, because when I was a student in Lund, I had one of my professors, Lars-Johan Malmberg, who was also a professor in Gothenburg University subsequently. He could explain and make anything tangible and interesting. And even one of the less interesting or exciting legal areas, he made that like a living. And then he all of a sudden, he created this sort of maritime law program within Lund University. So to me, it was obvious that I would go for maritime law, because he was sort of my beacon in the academic environment at that time. So that's why I think I opted for maritime law, and then I ended up at the Swedish Maritime Administration in Norrköping. I even left Skåne to work with my with maritime law. So
you found the most complex part of the law, and that is the maritime law.
It is really, and it's so I'm specialized in the more administrative part, regulating the ship, safety, security, environmental issues, living conditions, etc. I mean, a ship is basically a whole society condensed into a very tight space, and almost every aspect of the law is also relevant for ships. And plus, you also have the commercial side with contracts and liability, etc. I'm not specialized in the more commercial part of the maritime law, but I think that's also something that's very thrilling when it comes to the maritime law. It's such a broad spectrum of regulations and areas you need to be aware of and sort of have expertise within.
So you are the focal point for autonomous and smart ships. Is that a hard job, or?
Yeah, it is in a bit. It's like being some sort of government-paid activist. No, jokes aside, I thrive when there is a sort of a clean sheet, and that's, I think, what we had when I started up as a focal point in 2017, 18, something like that. There were lots of activities in the industry, not bustling, but still a lot of smaller companies, and I think that's very interesting and exciting as well. This is more non-traditional shipping, paving the way and leading. So lots of small companies, entrepreneurial startups, etc., being active, and that's also a challenge coming from authority, and you're used to dealing with these big companies and management companies, ship owners, etc., and all of a sudden you have small entrepreneurial companies. I mean, not being used to dealing with authorities and not being aware of international regulations, etc., for shipping. So that was an interesting cultural shock, I think, for both the government and me, and for the small entrepreneurs. So that's the focal point. It's been challenging and very interesting as well. It's been a great time, and it's also led me into being more active in the international community when it comes to trying to find relevant regulations for smart shipping or autonomous shipping, or MAS as it's called internationally.
Yeah, I think it's time that we learn what the abbreviation MAS stands for. Maritime Autonomous Surface Ships. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Going back to when you said that things started to happen here in Sweden, did that have anything to do with that we have some car companies in this country, other kinds of autonomous transportation?
Well, I certainly think that Sweden as a high-tech country, if you can say that, and also having some of the premier developers, both car companies and supply companies, when it comes to these techniques. Certainly, I think that gives a ripple effect also into other areas, including shipping. So that's probably a correct conclusion, I think.
So what do you do as a chairman of this working group at IMO, who is focused on MAS?
Well, I get a lot of attention and praise for the work of the working group, even though it's not deserved all the time. But I'm not the expert. I think that's the first thing I say. I'm trying to facilitate and make possible, basically, for the organization to work, because it's a lot of, I would say, planning and administration, and trying to create opportunities and possibilities for experts to do their work in this environment. Of course, I also produce some documents and try to help in that manner as well. But it's more and more trying to create an environment where good negotiations can take place, and also there are certain, I wouldn't say conflict areas in this environment, but there are at least different interests, you could say.
So who is in the working group? Are there external experts, or were you able to gather them, or did they just raise their hand and said, I want to be in this working group?
Mostly it's governments or IMO member states, or parties to the conventions that are being drafted and changed. So it's international IMO member states like Sweden, Denmark, Malaysia, etc., and also, of course, international intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations. So it's I think the same participants as in any IMO meeting. So you need, if you're an industry, if you're a company and you want to influence regulations or the work, you need to do that through a delegation or an observer to the work. And there are lots of different observers to IMO, of course, having different, and all observers, they try to represent one or many parts of the industry because it's such a diverse industry. So that's why we have lots of observers as well. It's not only governments. But I think most parts, most companies and other organizations, I hope, have a relevant observer or other organization that can represent them in this work. But it's basically administrations, and it's also other organizations, international, governmental and non-governmental organizations.
And what is the end goal? I understand you are looking to come out with a code for this.
Yes, in my, if I can use that term, my working group, we have at the Maritime Safety Committee, which is safety and security regulations. The end goal, the ultimate goal, is a mandatory code for autonomous ships, or MAS. That was based on conclusions drawn from a regulatory scoping exercise we conducted a couple of years back, and we finalized it last year. But that's my committee, or that's the safety and security regulations. We also have two other committees active in this work, and that's the facilitation committee on reporting requirements, etc., and also the legal committee with the liability convention, the bunker conventions, and the SUA, suppression of unlawful acts, and the more legal jurisdictional parts of the IMO framework. And those two committees, they haven't committed yet to drafting a code, because I think part of the conclusions from the regulatory scoping exercise was that there is no need for a specific new code for those areas. But when it comes to the safety and security, it's 31 conventions and codes that are affected. So if we were to amend, or at least consider amending all those instruments, it would be a gigantic work, and it's already now a huge task to just identify the areas that we need to regulate or deregulate, or whatever we call it, and also find proper regulations for MAS and for the different degrees also. So it's a huge task. So I'm glad I'm not the expert. I'm only the one trying to lead the experts, and that's challenging enough.
It's not going to happen next year or so.
It's not going to happen next year, but we have a very ambitious target, and target completion, as we call it. It's 2025. So we need to have some sort of draft code ready by 2025, and it will be non-mandatory at first, and then it will subsequently become mandatory a couple of years after that. I think the 2028 is the possible date for entry into force for a mandatory code. Having said that, another very important part of being the chairman is managing expectations, and I'm just saying that 2025 is ambitious. It's our goal date, but events could also happen, and we might not reach 2025. But you haven't heard that from me on this podcast.
We won't tell anyone. So what are the difficulties? Where does the disagreements, where do they occur?
Well, I think the disagreements aren't apparent yet, but we have some very, very central or very difficult barriers, I would say. And all three committees, as I mentioned, MSC, LEG, and FAL, we have all identified the role and the meaning of master and crew, for example, as one of the common gaps and themes, as we call them in the scoping exercise. We have these issues or problems that cut across all conventions, basically, and all instruments horizontally within the IMO. And the meaning of the master is the most central, I would say. First, how do we define master, and what role, how does the master's role change in a mass environment? The same for the crew. How does it change in a mass environment, for example? But we also have remote operations as another very crucial aspect. Huge shift, I would say, if we move the bridge from the bridge to another location, not on the ship, on another ship or ashore. And then that also gives rise to the remote control center issue, which is, I think, the third paramount issue to be discussed. And since these are cross-cutting issues, we have created a cross-cutting mechanism in the IMO, a joint working group. And we had our first meeting last week, actually. So it's joint setting. It's the technical experts, it's the legal experts, and the facilitation experts coming together and trying to start agreeing on these very central aspects of mass regulations and mass operations. So we are trying to, from the IMO, we are trying to identify the issues, and we're also trying to find the most appropriate way of addressing them. So this joint setting might be one way of solving it, hopefully.
So how did the meeting go?
Well, it was the first meeting and it was online. So I had, again, managing expectations. My ambition was to constitute the group, to get to everyone to know each other, and also we created a tool, sort of a structured approach for how we can work further on to document and compare also input from different delegations. Because it's the IMO, it's 174 member states plus international organizations, governmental organizations, etc. And of course, not all are active in a meeting like this, but it was still 150, 200 participants each day. And there is a possibility, at least, of lots of input coming into each meeting. So that's why we needed a structured approach, some sort of a table where we can compare input. So that's one of the key outputs, I think, just getting together and creating this tool that we can use for subsequent work. So I think all in all, it was a good meeting.
There's so many things happening right now, both in the world in general, but also in the maritime industry. And there is a change. I mean, if I would say that technically it's possible tomorrow to do autonomous shipping, as I understand it. I mean, we all read the papers and there are tests being done and there are a few on the water. But there are so many other things, as you say, that needs to be looked into. I'm not quite sure if the audience understands. I mean, you are in the middle of this, so you know. But I mean, compared to other modes of transport, maybe air transport could be something that we could look at. But I mean, otherwise, there are so many different legal conventions and legal regulations that we need to compare us to when it comes to shipping. It's a complex picture. All of these different legislations around autonomous ships compared to other transport modes.
Certainly, and that was the first challenge for us internationally. That's just to know what problems lie ahead. What problems do we have with the regulations? And that's why we had the regulatory scoping exercise to really find out all the issues. To know that before we go into this drafting mode where we try to regulate this new. Well, it's not new anymore, but it's this to regulate mass operations. And as you say, it's complex, and there's a lot of things happening already in the industry, as we are aware. We have very close projects to Sweden, where we are now. In Norway, for example, you have the Yara Birkeland and you have the ASCO projects. Albeit it's on Norwegian territory, at least today. But we also have part of back-to-back with the working group meeting last week that I just told you about. We felt that we need this input from reality. We need to know what's happening in the industry to get some sort of sense of partly the urgency. I mean, the IMO feels the urgency of industry. They have a business case. There's lots of projects ongoing, but there's a lack of regulations. There's a lack of legally sound mass operations. So we had back-to-back with the joint working group last week, we had a seminar where we invited industry, companies working on projects, other foundations and academia also, and non-governmental organizations, trying to feed into the joint working group setting we had and try to show us that there's already autonomous journeys taking place. There was one company who traveled across the Pacific Ocean, through the Panama Canal and into the Gulf of Mexico autonomously, and 97 up until 99.7% of the journey was autonomous. And of course, there was a crew on board, there was a master on board to oversee and take control if needed. But the computer there was already AI capable of doing this. And there was also a Japanese example of a ro-ro passenger ship doing the same journey. So the technology is there, and we are aware as regulators of that technology, but it's such a complex, technology is complex, but regulations are also very complex. So that's, as you say, it's a huge challenge to take on, but I think we have a good picture of the big issues. As I mentioned, the common gaps and themes, the meaning of the master, remote control operations and remote control stations. As long as we figure out a way to handle those key components of the regulations, I think we have done a lot. And so that's going to be the key issues for us to tackle in the near future.
So you have been around for a while, as I have. What are the biggest changes that you have seen within the maritime industry?
Oh, biggest changes. I think the technology is moving along faster and faster. And I think that's, for me, for my organization as a regulator, I think that's something that's more and more difficult for us to keep track with. And at the same time, regulations are expanding as well. So trying to keep up also with the regulations that we put in place ourselves, and the recognized organizations are also part of course, the oversight and conservation certification of those regulations. That's also a big challenge. So technology is more complex, and the legal environment is more complex. So that's, I think, that's also a big shift. And that's why we need more flexible, more smart regulations as well to handle these new developments. So, for example, in Sweden, we have for the domestic fleet, we have a functional-based regulations where we try to make possible innovations. And I think that's something we need to look into also when it comes to international regulations. We need relevant, flexible, smart regulations to make possible innovations on board, and which is also something that's paramount for the whole industry to develop, to continue innovate, to reach the sustainability goals, for example, to tackle the climate crisis, and shipping is a big part of that, of course. And there's ongoing work in the IMO to regulate emissions, for example, but we need to be able to comply with those regulations. And there, I mean, technology, digitalization, etc., is a key component in reducing emissions. But then the regulations can't be a barrier to innovation, for example, in that sector, in environment. So I think that's the big shift. And also, I think more and more, at least in my experience, I think we all work together, authorities and industry, trying to solve these issues.
When I listen to you, I think there is a big change in mindset. I think you have a mindset which I'm not used to hearing from regulators before. So that's a change for me.
Well, yeah, that might be a difference. I don't know. Partly that might also be why I call myself like an activist within the within the administration. I try to be not have two roles, but I try to make change from within and try to spur and promote different mindsets also from within. Because, I mean, our basic responsibility as an authority, it's safety, it's security, it's to provide an environmentally sound shipping, or at least to try to regulate and put that in place. But we also need to be mindful of other aspects and to have a competitive fleet, Swedish shipping, that's for example. So I think that's our task is more complex than it was 20 years ago. I think that's been part of the evolution also for administrations.
So what about the future? How do you see the future for shipping in general?
I think shipping will be a key component of the whole system. I mean, international trade is, I mean, that's the most obvious, but also nationally, I think if you look at projects ongoing now in Sweden and in our neighboring countries, it's also about where we have a shift from transport modes, for example, trying to promote shipping as being used more to carry goods, for example, but also to help big cities with congestion. I think Stockholm is a good example, Gothenburg also, where you can use shipping more and to alleviate the roads, to have less congestion on the roads, for example. I think that's also a more local aspect of it. I think shipping will increase both globally in the global trade, even though as we've seen now in the latest conflicts, that there's been a bit of a hiccup in international trade. But I think looking ahead, the importance of shipping will remain. And that's also a challenge for us and for everyone involved in shipping to provide ships with seafarers, for example, competent certified seafarers. So that's also something that's going to be a challenge for not only Sweden, but also other nations to find the best people, to get the best people into the industry. So again, talking about mass, there's been I think a misconception when it comes to mass being unmanned, for example. Mass is going to be relying on humans also, regardless of whether they're manned or unmanned. We still need the best people coming into this industry to man the ships, but also in management positions, in the research and innovation positions. The whole cluster needs humans, and that won't change.
So then we come to my soapbox. How do we raise the profile of the maritime industry? Because not a lot of young people knows about us. Not a lot of people in general knows about what we do and how we do that. And I think it's important that we project a correct picture to the young people. We are not what everyone thinks we are, what we did in the 80s or something. We are not that industry anymore. We have changed, and we are doing, I can see so many good things being done and so many projects working on the climate, as you said, or social government and things like that. But we hardly ever talk about that to the general public. How can we be better at doing that?
Well, that's the $1 million question, as you say. It's how do we reach out, or how do we reach the next generation? Like you said before we started the podcast, the Greta generation. It's a difficult one to answer. I think we need to find partly new avenues to sort of inform or make the kids aware that shipping is a vital part of the whole global trade. Firstly, whatever you find in stores, almost everything you eat somehow is connected to shipping. So it's a very important industry in that regard, and it's not very visible. And it's only visible when something happens, like Ever Given choking the Suez Canal. That's when we get the headlines. So I mean that's another key issue to promote this good idea, or promote a positive, exciting profile for shipping. So, but I don't have any super good ideas. I mean, we need to find ways to connect with the young generation. Next thing might be having a Swedish Transport Agency TikTok channel.
What would be the content? What would you fill it with?
It would be very, for me at least, as a regulator, very exciting information on new regulations, etc. No, just kidding. I'm not sure that the general public or the youth is aware of how much innovation and how much exciting work is taking place in companies, for example. Design companies, in the shipping companies, technical development each shipping company is developing their own products, basically, if you compare to other modes, ships or aircrafts or models, cars or models. But each ship is basically one-off. So every ship you buy or construct is built, it's got its own design, its own innovative design and solutions. And if you example, work at a shipping company or at the design bureau, you will be part of that solution making. And so I think that's, if you have that sort of passion for designing or creating solutions, if you're a young engineer, for example, I think shipping would be a very exciting place to work, for example. And also for me as a legal advisor, I mean, shipping, as we touched upon before, it's like a spectrum of every regulation, every area of regulation you have in society. It's being put together condensedly in every ship, basically. So that's also very exciting. You get to work with all parts of regulations. If you're a shipping lawyer, for example, or a legal advisor, you won't be specialized in any particular part of the regulations, but you would be working with every part of the law, basically.
But I'm thinking also that we are now looking for other competencies that we have had before. Because, I mean, for instance, cybersecurity experts is probably going to be very tall order for them in the future here in our industry.
I think most people, including the youth, don't know exactly what they will be working with. I didn't know when I started to study the law that I would be working with shipping, and I think it's the same with most young people as well. That they have an interest, they're engineering or otherwise, and they start working or start studying, and maybe as they develop as a young professional, they realize that, there's this very exciting world called shipping, where I can have an international environment. It's problem solving all day in and day out. Usually very small organizations when it comes to the company itself. I think that at least that's the way I see most shipping companies, that they're very innovative, small organizations, if you exclude the really big companies, of course. But most like the Dunsa shipping companies, I mean, that's a really exciting part of the industry, and leading the way, for example, Vinga also being in London, for example, during the Maritime Environmental Protection Committee, showing a showcase for Swedish innovation. And I mean, that's something that we need to show also the youth, that this is a Swedish innovation, it's leading the way internationally. It's showing that we can, today, 2022, already comply with future regulations, and it can be done. So I think it's also an inspiring example. And we have Ocean Bird, another flagship project that's going to challenge, the whole industry. And I was involved more in research and innovation through the Swedish Traffic Administration's Sjöfartsportfölj. And you could see after Ocean Bird, you could see lots and lots of projects coming in using sails as propulsion or developing sail solutions, etc. So it's Swedish innovation is leading, and that's something that we should make more people aware of.
I'm thinking so much about whose responsibility is it to tell the youth of the world about this exciting industry where you could just meet so many interesting people and do so many interesting jobs and so on. Because, I've been asking every of my guests that, how did you come into this industry? And out of almost 200, let's say it's 5 people who went and looked for it. or saw an ad or something like that. The other ones have just either fallen into the industry by accident, if you can say that, or they have a family in the industry. So I think we are losing out on so many people that we need and who could become our colleagues and find all the interesting things that we are doing. So that is where my mind is.
I totally agree. There should be, and I don't know whose responsibility it is, but there should be some sort of strategy. There might already be a strategy, I guess, but in the industry and also in administration on with how to enlighten people about the industry and also how to make them aware and make them aware of all the fantastic opportunities that you have in this industry in any occupation or capacity, depending on where you come from, of course, what kind of background you have. But there's so much you can do. You can influence. Just roll up your sleeves and start working. I mean, you can do so much because it's usually, as we said, smaller organizations that it means that you can influence more if you're ready to do the work. So, yeah.
Did you have a role model growing up?
No, I can't say I had a particular role model, but I've had some very good leaders, people I've been looking up to, I guess. As I mentioned, my first professor being, I think the first one as a lawyer showing me this maritime law, for example, and in that way making me aware of this area. And so I guess he was one of the first sort of influencers, you could say. But then again, I've had many good managers also in the administration, just showing me what a civil servant should be and how to conduct myself, and but also showing me the possibilities. If I work hard, I can do so many things, good things, and have fun at the same time. I mean, that's why I'm still doing this. It's because I'm having a lot of fun every week. It's crazy.
Do you consider yourself a role model today?
I wouldn't say that. I'm trying to avoid incidents. But I guess I'm trying to use whatever platform I have to promote. What I can promote, to promote the good examples that I encounter, to promote, as I said, good regulations. Always trying to have that in mind, and also trying to inform. And as we've been talking about the last minutes here about this wonderful community, shipping community.
Who would you be interested in listening to in the shipping podcast? Who do you think I should interview the next?
In my administrations, I don't know if you have interviewed Marina Angsel. She's also a prominent figure in the international shipping community. And she has a long career in the administration. So she's another role model, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you, Henrik, for taking the time to speak to me.
My pleasure, and I was so happy when you asked me. I've been an avid listener, and it was great fun.
Thank you, Henrik. I will look forward to 2025 and some of your efforts being presented. It's exciting to hear that Transport on Water is also looking into autonomy. I want to take this opportunity to remind my listeners that I'm waiting for your photos of what you're doing when you're listening to the Shipping Podcast. I enjoy them so much. They give me an idea of who you are, and we can also build a relationship. By the way, I use the photos in my bi-weekly newsletter, which you can subscribe to on the website shippingpodcast.com. Please send me your photos. Until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a Shipping Podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.